everybody to my second live stream ever. Today I'm joined by Ahmet. We're both formerly Amazon Web Services Innovation Advisory. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but today we are here to talk about how AI is accelerating the innovation life cycle, which is two very broad terms, AI, innovation. So hopefully we'll be able to get some specificity around that and really have an interesting conversation about how we're being able to build products better, faster, smarter than before. So before we get started, Amit, I would love for you to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about what you do, your experience.
All right, thanks, AJ. Nice to be with you. Hi, everyone. I've been a colleague of AJ's at AWS. Before that, I worked with McKinsey, Google, Meta, General Electric, um, and a couple of startups, mostly in the product and innovation game for the past, I think, 20 years or so. Um, and recently, I moved to Nairobi in Kenya. We have rain season right now, so if my video seems a bit off, there's not a lot of bandwidth to go around here, so that's why. And I've been exploring what we can do with the cool new AI toys that have been launching all around us in the past 24 months for the year or so that I've been here. So happy to share some of this with you and go into a discussion. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's definitely, it has been a struggle for me to keep on top of even a fraction of the tools that are coming out every single day. It's like AI on top of AI on top of AI, and you know, just being able to weed through the noise and figuring out what's good, what's worthwhile exploring has been intense. So, with that, why don't we start with, you know, breaking down the word innovation? Because if
Mm.
anything, that is a hugely used or overused term. So, yeah, tell us more like in your head, what does innovation mean to you? How are we framing this?
So whenever I talk with like traditional companies, it's typically something new in their industry, something they want to make a big splash with and leverage. What I've seen in most tech companies I've worked with, like Google and Amazon, it's actually lots of little improvements, um, lots of tweaking, lots of taking something that worked in one domain, putting it somewhere else. Um, and I find these little improvements, these little things that you can fix in the customer experience or support or whatever it is you're creating, those tend to get immediate returns. Whereas the big
Mm-hmm.
things, like if I think about some of my friends working at Google Loon, for instance, there's some crazy ideas out there, but most of them they don't pan out. So that's like this typical distinction between disruptive innovation and the incremental innovation side.
Yeah.
Um, so that's like the textbook definition, I say. Um, but in working with entrepreneurs, both here in Kenya and back in Europe, they don't really care about innovation at all. Like it's mostly
Interesting.
improving things for the customer or getting an edge over competition. And a lot of it can simply be being better internally in operations or being better in
Mm-hmm.
creating a sales funnel or creating content. Um, Whether it's really new or innovative or not, they don't really. Most entrepreneurs, I don't think, really care, which is
Yeah.
quite different from what I found in like corporates and established companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes I feel like the word innovation can be a banner for anything just to get excitement, right? Because
Yeah.
there's tons of innovation. There's back office innovation. We used to talk about robotics, and I was really excited about robotics until I realized we were talking about RPA, not actual robots, like physical robots. They're just doing process automation and things like that. It's, I mean, yeah, it's still innovative, but it's not as big and has that sexy hook as
It's not as
innovation and
glamorous.
yeah.
Yeah, it's not as exciting sounding as, let's occupy Mars. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, so you did some accounting and HR back office tweaks here and there. All right. But that's actually pretty, like, the boring stuff I find these days actually more exciting
Mm-hmm.
because if you think back about working at Amazon, there was a lot of boring stuff that I did that I didn't expect to do. And
Mm-hmm.
there's tons that you could just automate, even at a big tech company like AWS. So then you look at traditional companies, and there's even more of that. And I think that's really where the bigger potential is in the boring stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Even if that's not as, doesn't get the sexy banner,
Yeah.
as you said.
Yeah. I remember reading an article a long time ago where it was talking about different startup ideas and where should entrepreneurs be focusing their time, and one of the things that they said is the money is in the boring stuff,
Yeah.
right? It's making everything work. It's making the integrations work. But I mean, even that, like you said, it's how you frame it. It can all be exciting. So yeah, let's look at that. So where are you seeing AI playing into this space? So we can bucket this into the disruptive innovation,
All right.
incremental innovation, and then I would say we have a everyday innovation, like your back office innovation type
Gotcha.
stuff. So, yeah, like where are you seeing AI play into the space and the different phases of the innovation life cycle?
So what I'm seeing in the short term, what a lot of companies are going after is personalizing existing customer experiences even more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Going from micro targeting individual users through platforms like Meta, like Facebook ads,
Mm-hmm.
um, to gathering data in other ways to figure out what can be a very custom, very personalized experience for customers. Like, that's not really something new. Like, if you look at Stitch Fix, they launched
Mm-hmm.
in 2011. For those that don't know, it's basically fashion recommendation. Like, it looks at your clothing styles, the things that you prefer, and then puts your outfit together. Like, it can curate an individualized style. And they've been doing this since, or trying to do this since 2011, but they really took off, 21, 22. Uh, obviously during COVID, when people didn't have
Mm-hmm.
anything else to do but stand in front of webcams.
Mm-hmm.
But also because a lot of the GPT tech, the LLMs were softly launching, and
Mm-hmm.
that enabled new capabilities. So I think we'll see a lot more of that all across the board, and you can already see it in the big tech companies. Um, like, I think Amazon recommendations will look completely different a few years down the
Mm-hmm.
line. Um, Google search as well. If they can, fix the issues with recommending eating rocks and
Yeah, yeah.
gluing gluing cheese on your pizzas, things like that. Um, but I think that's one main area that's immediate and short term where companies are trying to play. Um, but you can really see it across the entire life cycle, from initial conception to, like, prototyping and testing, which I don't think are going to exist in that form in most innovation processes anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, if it takes me a few hours to wireframe something, and in the same time I can create working code and I don't have to be a coder, well, why would I create wireframes, right?
Mm-hmm.
um, or just tell the tooling and the framework, what kind of A/B tests I want to be running, like what are the assumptions that I'm trying to test, and then just let the experiments design themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like if you look at Figma and Framer, they're already moving in that direction. So
Yeah.
I think we'll see that also with Webflow, Canva to some extent. You already see the first experiments happening there.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the prospect. I mean, I think back to what we did where, you're starting with the working backwards process or innovation sprint essentially. So ideation,
Right.
defining
Yeah.
the problem, defining the customers, defining your hypothesis, creating a research plan. And, there was a lot of individuals involved in that, and there's a lot of work involved in it. And no matter how much time and effort you put in it, you're still a bit myopic in the focus. So,
Yeah.
as I see some of these platforms that are enabling, design thinking workshops where you can throw your ideas on and then it synthesizes it and comes up with here are your themes, here are suggestions, here are all sorts of stuff. That I think is really empowering for teams because now you're benefiting from a ton of knowledge that you could bring in.
And I think you can apply that to the process itself. Like if you mentioned working backwards sessions, when we used to do these things with customers, facilitating of a group of people, it's full day effort, right? You're there the whole time. There's the prep work, there's the work that comes after that. Um, but a lot of that, actually could be just a very smart Alexa skill. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like not to put down the experience that the facilitator has, but the act of facilitating the process itself, that's not something where you need a whole lot of experience. There's a few key questions you're asking, there's some guidance you're providing. um, and in fact, if you look into gaming, for instance, Wizards of the Coast is basically creating a virtual game master in its Beyond D&D platform, um, which will do some basic prompting to the players. And
Mm-hmm.
you already see more of that in other games. And I think
Mm-hmm.
um, there's examples in mental health, in
Mm-hmm.
coaching, and so on, which I don't think is a good idea with the current state of the technology. But supporting processes, or giving guidance in processes, I think that's a good use of it. And you could see parts of that in the latest Google demo and also the GPT-4o demo as
Mm-hmm.
well. And in teaching and training purposes, I think there's a lot of use cases there that could be explored, but it would require specialized tooling, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the idea of instead of referring it today as artificial intelligence, instead referring to it as augmented intelligence,
Yeah,
right? We have all these challenges around, hallucinations and setting up guardrails to get the right data to be queried and essentially aggregated and regurgitated in the models that it's hard to trust it as a decision
yeah,
system today, but using it to see around corners and here are the questions that you should ask. Here are the things to consider. Have you thought about this? It's almost like an accelerant for brainstorming and creativity.
yeah. And I think that's actually a better application than generating content. I think Gen AI is a bit of a misnomer because what I found in using things like ChatGPT, Claude, Midjourney, the interesting things actually happen if you feed it with something that you've done and then prompt it to ask you some questions about it. Things
Mm-hmm.
you might have missed, things that you haven't thought about, or simply summarizing, like analyzing and summarizing a text. It'll give you what it thinks the patterns are, the
Mm-hmm.
and based on the training data the tool has, um, and that's a good way to reflect about things you create, I think,
Mm-hmm.
because it's also not contentious. If it's coming from a tool, you go, oh, okay, I should be thinking about this, or maybe that's an approach I could take. If it's coming from another person, well, there's the whole interpersonal thing. You don't know if the other person has an agenda. Like, there's all of that involved that you can just simply eliminate.
That's really interesting because it makes me think back to some of the interpersonal challenges around any new product launching, right? You have
Right.
personas like the devil's advocate in the room or the hippo, the highest paid person in the room. And now you're throwing in an AI that's going to start, helping that brainstorming process. So, at what point or are we already seeing diminishing returns where it's harder to get buy-in if those people aren't part of the innovation life cycle?
Yeah, and funny enough, there are models for this. Like, you can see it in sci-fi. Just look at the original Star Trek. You have all the bridge
Mm-hmm.
crew and then the computer that they're asking questions to and that they're having a dialogue with, which is sort of advising and guiding them along. That's different than just saying, hey, find me the 10 files where some topic is covered. It's different from search. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I think that interactive model, it has its value.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, I think it's sort of misplaced or overused in um, a lot of the tools that we have. Like, if I'm trying to create an image, I'm not going to describe the image to you. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I can do that in part, but then at some point I have to work visually. Or if I'm
Mm-hmm.
using code, I can't just tell you what all the code is supposed to do. There's other things I need to do. So um, that the prompting will only get us so far.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a reminds me of a tweet that I saw of a principal engineer. I don't remember exactly where they were, but they basically were talking about that they're not worried about AI taking their jobs because that would require executives to articulate what it is that they want.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
even with all these tools, I mean, even I am always trying to improve my interactions and prompting strategies with various LLMs. And even that changes through the day, depending on how
Right.
much processing power is assigned to, GPT 4.0 today. Uh, there's so many
Right.
variables.
And I think that's already changing. Like, if you look at Midjourney, how it went from Discord to now a web interface where
Mm-hmm.
prompting is part of it, but a lot of it is now a visual language that they're developing. You can also see this in Adobe products. And I think if you look a few years into the future, you'll probably be able to have your own like personalized local AI tools running where you create your own custom
Mm-hmm.
interfaces, um, like you're creating Word documents or PowerPoints today. But we don't
Mm-hmm.
have these applications yet because everyone's right now just focused on sort of squeezing what's possible with AI into whatever products they have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel that there's a lot of products coming out there that say, "Oh, we have AI," but really it's a wrapper around an LLM, and it's just more of a differentiated use case
Right.
innovation on top of it. But there's a place for that, and I think it's helpful. I mean, going back to the different personas of a team who is trying to brainstorm things, being able to train specific personas as agents, right, to help and come in and play the different roles. For example, a researcher, I was on a call a couple weeks ago, and it was 4 humans and 5 AI agents. And one of the
Interesting. Okay.
takeaways was did the humans even need to be here, right? It could have all been an AI call. But one of the AI agents had real time access to a financial system as well as document repository for the internal documents. So they could literally ask, hey, I forget the name of the bot, but let's just say, hey, Chloe, can you
Yeah.
tell us what the performance was last quarter around X, Y, and Z? And it could just go out and get it and pull it in and let the team move faster through the conversation.
So I think this is sort of democratizing what's already been happening in the industry in different tech companies for years. Like if you look at Airbus, for instance, they've been simulating engines and leveraging AI
Mm-hmm.
to optimize that for almost 2 decades now,
Mm-hmm.
um, and they had experimented with using AI agents for the individual parts of the engine and then see how they interact. Um, so that's already sort of going in that direction. I think the next steps would be CAT systems or um, simulation systems where you simply define the parameters and then let the AI generate the different variations of engine design. And that's sort of
Mm-hmm.
happening in pharma, like Pfizer's been doing that for protein folding for a couple of years now. So now it's the interesting thing is now it's sort of arriving in our desktops for normal knowledge workers.
Yeah. It's interesting you talked about CAD. This has been going on for a while, but generative design within CAD and how that's advancing
Oh
and how
yeah.
you can say, okay, here's the requirements, here are the fixed points, and now build something in between it that
Yeah.
solves for the problem, right? Like I think that one of the demos people who first get introduced to generative design is that chair that has I think three legs and a really weird design,
Yeah.
but it's super efficient, super comfortable, and it was made with AI, right?
I
But
think
AI, yeah, go on.
that's a space that's very exciting. Like I've been looking at taking 2D drawings and then converting them into 3D with AI tools, and then
Mm-hmm.
taking those 3D models and then turning them into printable models with a different AI tool, which then
Mm-hmm.
optimizes like how it should be printed. And that's pretty interesting because up to now you could just print very simple things with your 3D printer at home, unless you were very skilled in that whole space. But now you can basically tell one tool what you're trying to create and take that output,
Mm-hmm.
give it to another tool to say, okay, now convert this into whatever, and then you can just chain these to get to the result that you want. It's
Mm-hmm.
still very like tricky. You still have to tweak a lot, but I think a few years down the line, that's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think that goes to a conversation that you see a lot around generative AI specifically, but there seems to be two camps of people. The ones who say, oh, you know, generative AI is just going to predict what next best word is. It's not going to come up with
Right.
novel ideas. And then there's another side of the camp that's saying, hey, it's fed all of this information and it can start predicting new and novel approaches to things that we haven't thought about
Yeah.
there. So your 3D printing example, I think, is it falls really into that because it's like, oh, is it optimizing for how we already do it, or is it coming up with new ways of doing things?
I mean, there's valid points to both. Few years back, I bought the IBM Watson's cookbook. All these
Hmm.
recipes generated by AI, but at the end there was some tweaking and curation by a chef who knew what he
Mm-hmm.
was doing. Or there was, what was it called? Sony had something called Flow Machine, I think, back in 2018. I don't know if it still exists, but they created an AI generated music album called Hello World.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, oh, it's all AI generated, but of course you have a professional editor and a musician going over the whole composition to make sure it at least makes sense at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think it's I mean, there's truth in both camps, and honestly, I don't really get the debate between those. I mean, yeah, both are right to some extent. You
Mm-hmm.
sort of have to look at from both sides.
Yeah. I feel like maybe last year I read a research paper where researchers were asking a neural net to start designing a better architected neural net.
Oh, right,
And it
yeah,
was
I
coming
heard about
up
that
with
one.
some really interesting approaches that they hadn't thought about.
Yeah, I guess that's where hallucinations are really helpful in a way because
Mm-hmm.
if it comes up with crazy shit people haven't thought about, but it could actually work. That's really helpful,
Yeah.
especially like if you're like a domain expert, say in design, and you're sort of stuck in one perspective, and it'll help you to open it up. Um, I think that's very valuable also because it's coming from the machine, from the tool that you're using.
Mm-hmm.
It's not from another human being, so you're not going to be defensive about it.
Mm-hmm. I think that feeds back into a point that we had earlier about when we were going and doing these workshops, and
Right.
we would have experts around the design thinking, brainstorming, ideation approach, but then also subject matter expert, technical architect, but they all have their specialty.
Yeah.
And that in itself introduces bias because you know if you're a
Sure.
hammer, it's a nail, right? You're gonna,
Yeah.
if you're into IoT, it's gonna be IoT. If you're into whatever it is, so you know, love to hear your thoughts about how are we dealing with bias in the innovation and creative space? What challenges are we facing, and what progress have we made?
I think from what I'm seeing, it's actually bleeding into these tools because of the training sets. They're biased themselves. Um, and at least with ChatGPT, I think there were some demonstrations where people um, prompted it in a way to reveal its original training sets, down
Mm-hmm.
to which person it came from, and there's obvious bias in those texts. Um, and the Google, eat more rocks example is a good example of that, right? You feed it
Mm-hmm.
Reddit, you're going to get crazy stuff. Like feed it 4chan, and you're going to go nuts. Um,
Yeah.
right? That's why X, the Grok by
Grok.
X or Twitter. I don't know what to call the company anymore. um, I mean, that's why that tool is pretty nuts in the responses that you're getting because it's trained on the Twitter data set, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think you could leverage it to um, sort of fight one bias with another, but um, yeah, I think to some extent you will need that friction in the innovation process. Like the best work that I had, the best sessions that I had were with experts who were very knowledgeable, very opinionated, not afraid of voicing their opinion,
Mm-hmm.
but humble enough to, recognize the other's
Yeah.
perspective and then sort of try and work a solution on that. So if you have adults in the room, I think you get good results. So
Mm-hmm.
not sure to what extent, those tools help with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can definitely see if it's able to pick up some element of moderating the conversation. I remember, I think this was already 15 years ago, there was an app that you would run on an iPhone and you would wear your phone on a lanyard. And as you're having the discussions, it will start basically indicating your tone of voice, how much
Oh,
time
right.
you're taking, and the whole idea was to facilitate productive conversations by stopping people who are being uh, confrontational or trying to give a voice to people who are not really speaking up, which are all the things that a really good facilitator, that is their job, to make sure that everybody has
Yeah.
a voice and everybody's yes ending each other in essence.
Yeah, I think that was there were experiments in Boston. I don't remember if it was whether it was MIT or Harvard doing that. Um, yeah, I like the general idea of tech supporting that. Like if you had augmented glasses that could help you read facial expressions across cultures better, or if you're neurodivergent and you're actually having problems reading people's expressions, that could help.
Mm-hmm.
The problem that I see with it, with the current state of the technology, and I'm by no means an expert on this. I'm just parroting something from a conversation with a computer vision expert who basically said, "Yeah, we're not able to do that yet. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not reliable at all. You should be using it in policing or any of the applications where it's currently being used
Mm-hmm.
because we're not able to detect emotions to that level yet." Um, so if that's true, and I have a sense that a lot of use cases that are coming out now, they're actually not ready. Like the tech
Mm-hmm.
doesn't seem solid. Um,
Mm-hmm.
even if you like, I don't know if you do you have a pro account in Claude or ChatGPT?
Yes.
Like if you go crazy on it in a given day, at some point you'll get the "oh sorry, we have some capacity issues" type of
Mm-hmm.
message, right? Which, imagine a car doing that on a highway. It's like, "sorry dude, you've driven enough. That's it
Yeah.
for today. I'm going to stop now." Yeah, that's not reliable tech, my friends. Like that shouldn't be seeing the road, but it's out, and that's sort
Mm-hmm.
of worrying if you have to rely on the results of that.
Yeah. Yeah. If I think back to the innovation hype cycle, right? We're
Right.
still coming up on the disruptive innovation. Lots of things are new. A lot of these products feel like well marketed prototypes because it's still in
Yes.
the learning phase, right? And I think I mean, that's part of the innovation life cycle. You got to get things out, you got to test, you got to learn, you got to iterate. But then you end up in situations where you have these, you know, market on the market prototypes and pilots, but then they're being treated as established products or lines of business. And then,
Right.
you mentioned early on the incremental innovation or our back office innovation and expecting an ROI on that in the next, 1 to 6 months. Whereas disruptive innovation, I really see this might be a couple years until you're actually making a solid revenue stream because you're still figuring out how to implement it and use it and what it
Yeah.
actually is and how it solves a customer challenge.
Yeah. I think that's mostly because the hype and the focus is going the wrong direction. Like if you're using ChatGPT for all the things that it's being advertised for, it's not doing a good job of like 90% of that. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're telling it, "hey, what's the sentiment in this text in this email?" Or, "can you give me a short one paragraph summary of these 3 pages?" It does an astoundingly good job of that. Like this
Mm-hmm.
is, like, if I think back to my studies like 25 years ago, um, like the first time I used AI tools was Elisa by Joseph Weizenbaum. It's a
Mm-hmm.
Lisp tool, which is just a conversational tool that he built to research human interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And even back at the time, the conversations were so good, people thought like they were, they could talk to it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now I think because that feeling you get is even stronger, like it could probably pass the Turing test the way it's
Mm-hmm.
designed originally. It feels like it can do more, which it
Mm-hmm.
can't. But for those very narrow cases, it's really great, and that's where I think there's actually um, a lot of value in those boring back office tasks. Like, think about how many proposals you write in professional services or,
Yeah.
you know, putting together sales slides and customizing all of that. Most of it is templates and then customizing anyway. So,
Mm-hmm.
why not leave the customization work to the AI? The templates are there anyway, and then you save a lot of work, a lot of hours,
Mm-hmm.
which are also expensive hours because a lot of times you put expensive resources on those documents, which shouldn't be
Yeah.
wasting their time on those documents.
Yeah, I love that example because going through multiple large global consulting companies, I am always shocked that SOWs and proposals, somebody opens up a Word doc, they copy and paste one that they have experience with, and then it gets shot around by email to, 50 different people and everybody is furiously typing
Yeah,
and it seems so archaic. Why do you think that is? Curious to hear your thoughts. I have my thoughts.
that's a really great question. Um, so for some weird reason, all the professional service companies, like all the consultancies and tech companies that sell this to customers, they're not really leveraging it internally to the extent that they could. Not that I've seen. Maybe there's something hidden somewhere, but I don't know about it. Um, Part of it, I think, is they're more outwards focused in creating those products and then selling it to customers than actually making it available internally,
Mm-hmm.
because that transformation work, it takes a lot of work, right?
Yeah.
So that's one. I think you have to actually transform the way people are working. That's always difficult to do. Then there's sentiment to it. Like, there's people who want to hold on to their little empire of SOW
Mm-hmm.
creation because they're just like, that's what their job is basically based on. Um,
Yeah.
and then also there's, I don't think, especially people who are not in those industries or in those companies who look at it from the outside, they don't realize that a lot of the problems they're facing in their companies, we're facing as well. Like, you have
Mm-hmm.
data silos, you have data that's unstructured. You probably have written 30 SOWs to the same customer and thousands for the same industry, but it's not collected anywhere in any
Mm-hmm.
fashion that you could mine that data. Like, if you
Yeah.
did, that'd be great. But I knew from McKinsey, for instance, having slides on a certain industry or niche, that was a social currency. It was like, hey, who has the
Yep.
slides on whatever? And then someone would say, here you go, but you owe me, right? there
Mm-hmm.
was there was that exchange going on, even though there were like internal tools and platforms trying to get people to share their knowledge, but nobody did that because there was no incentive to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I think those reasons are part of that, but I think the main reason, the fourth one, is people always ignore back office and operational efficiency in those areas. Like, they always do. I've never come
Mm-hmm.
across a larger company, whether they're in tech or other industries, that said, "Hey, let's let's sharpen our own axe, let's improve our operations
Hmm.
first and then sell it to the customers, never happened.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's weird, especially now with this do more with less
Yeah.
attitude. But, it's even do more with even less improvement to our processes. Uh, and you're right. I think you are absolutely correct with the transformation need, right? I feel like probably 90% of all of the innovation engagements that I've been on end it with the conversation of, okay, how are we going to do a baseline digital transformation to bring your data silos together?
Right.
My God, working in manufacturing, I had an engagement where we're trying to use Google Glass to do work order procedures and inspections and stuff like that. So the first question was, great, where do we get the assembly instructions? And they said,
Yeah.
oh, Frank has a binder there that they've been taking photos and printing them out for like 15 years. So
Yeah.
go talk to Frank. And then, they're surprised when you come back and say, okay, well, first you need to do a digitization project, and that's going to cost, hundreds of
Yeah.
thousands of dollars. You don't even have the infrastructure to handle it. So I
Yeah.
think that gets into, you know, these are the same types of barriers that I'm seeing as holding companies back from really leveraging
Yeah.
AI, not just for
And
innovation, but for everyday
oh,
use.
across the board, whatever you do, it doesn't even have to be innovation projects. Like a couple of weeks back, I talked to a guy who has an agency in Singapore. There are just 8 people who build products for others. And basically, in a conversation like that, at like the tech companies or professional service companies I worked with in the past, there would be 3 or 4 guys at least in that call. Like you'd have the account manager, the innovation advisor, and then
Mm-hmm.
couple of others, right? He was there alone, and then he said, first thing he said was, "Hey, is it okay if I record this with Otter?" I'm like, "Sure, I know Otter AI, go for it."
Mm-hmm.
So that AI tool recorded the whole thing, created a transcript, created a summary, created here are the 4 things you agreed on, here are the 3 action
Mm-hmm.
items you all agreed on. By the way, I'm sending the emails out to everyone so you have it in your inbox right after the call. That's basically one person saved because that's typically like what the account managers do. And then they put it
Yeah.
into Salesforce or whatever system. And I asked him to show me the backend of his ops. And basically, what he did was to create a connection from Otter to Pipedrive, that's a CRM, via Zapier.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that stuff landed in Zapier automatically, right? And then it goes on, connecting tools, connecting
Mm-hmm.
um, different AI platforms that they're using, um, automating a lot of the small stuff that over time tends to, occupy a full person.
Yeah.
Um, so that's why they were only 8 people because they were leveraging all these tools, which, to be fair, still cost probably $1,000 to $1,500 per month, but that's less than a person's wages.
Yeah.
Um, so that, and then you try to compete against that as a professional service company. The only way you can compete right now is because of your brand and reputation, but
Mm-hmm.
not because you're more efficient or
Yeah.
your output is better.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And the note taking example is great. I use Fathom, but I've
Yeah.
experimented with Otter too. I actually trying to decide between the two, but the number of times I've been on calls and either nobody took notes or somebody was determined to be the note taker. It's awful. The whole note taking thing, that is such a great thing to start getting rid of. And almost every call I do now, I have my agent sign on automatically and auto record. And, you never know what nuggets you're going to come out of it. But you're right.
Yeah.
It's if you take the time to understand the process you're trying to complete, then you can. I always talked about is composition of different products and elements instead of
Yeah.
monolithic solution that you need to create.
And I think there's a deeper issue to consider if you're doing this in companies is think about what actually excites people in their work. Well, it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely not playing email ping pong, trying to figure out that one slot that works across 3 time zones. Like, yeah, that's not the fun part. Or writing SOWs or proposals or
Mm-hmm.
like all of that stuff is just work around the work or work you have to do to actually get to the work. So that's where these tools should be applied to that
Mm-hmm.
boring stuff because nobody wants to do that, right?
Yeah.
So let's automate and improve those and build tooling around those. If I want to write copy and I need some AI help, I can run a grammar checker or something, but I don't need the tool to write the copy for me. That's the fun part
Mm-hmm.
for me,
Yeah.
So I think that's why I said I think that's the focus is on the wrong things right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So we had one question come in, and for anybody watching the live stream, if you comment on the LinkedIn event, it shows up for us, so we can answer those questions. So one of the questions we have: where does most innovation occur? Risk averse enterprises or startups, and why? Ooh, interesting question. You want to take a
So I
shot at it first?
I can have a shot at it. So
Yeah.
if you define innovation as something that actually survives on the market, because if it's a cool idea, like you can try and shoot a man to the moon in a cannon, if they're gonna hit the next mountain, it's innovative, but it's not very useful. So no one's gonna adopt it on the market. Um, so those I would not count, which pretty much discounts 80 to 90% of startups because most of those things they don't go anywhere. And product market fit, execution problems, they're just part of it. But a lot of times, the actual idea is not something that works. So I think a lot of it actually happens in normal, boring enterprises. I don't know what you mean by risk averse because depending on who you ask, they will all say that they're risk averse. Like the
Mm-hmm.
manufacturing companies say, "Oh, we're so risk averse." Financial industries, healthcare, some of them obviously more heavily regulated than others. But I've seen most interesting stuff actually come from normal traditional companies. There's the things that we see in tech. I think they make a big splash because they're very focused on technology that we can relate to. But
Mm-hmm.
a lot of things like the Pfizer example I mentioned, um, you never see those because they never make a big splash out in the market. But
Mm-hmm.
that's where most things are happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely feel like the more entrepreneurs that I've met, they're probably more risk adverse than a lot of executives that I've met at larger enterprises. Because you have to be. You have a limited runway, you have a limited timeline to get to market, to become profitable. You can take a risk, but only so far. But I
Yeah.
think, yeah, sometimes I feel that enterprises can have the ability to innovate within their walls, but then there's risk to coming out with an experiment. We were talking about Google beforehand, and suggesting to put glue on a pizza to make it the cheese cheesier and stretch out. you know, that is a great capability, but then it was a risk, and that risk backfired a little bit, where now they're losing face, at least publicly. Uh, so there is a hesitation for enterprises to bring out their innovations. And the glue and the cheese one is interesting because if you look at how commercials are made when they have the pizza
Huh.
coming up,
Right.
they use
They use that.
glue. Yeah, so it makes you wonder, why did it say glue? The question
Yeah.
was, how do you make pizza cheese stretch more? And it's like, yeah, you use glue because in commercials that's what they do. Ooh, we got a couple other questions. Okay, so are there any industries that you think AI will most certainly fail in?
Yeah. So I think the mental health that you mentioned, or anything towards psychology, sociology, like these fields, they're pretty new. They're only 100 years old. We still don't know how the brain really works, how human interpersonal interaction works in a lot of cases. Like behavioral sciences is still a pretty new field. And I actually met Joseph Weizenbaum back in 2005 when he was in Berlin. And
Mm-hmm.
we talked about Elisa because like I was a big fan. And he said he never intended that thing to be like a psychologist or a virtual coach
Mm-hmm.
or anything of that sort. And he was very surprised and shocked that people interacted with it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And he saw that as a huge problem because the way social media was going, and that was back in 2005, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Like if these machines get so good that you can actually build it into social media, like into Facebook chat, WhatsApp chats, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, who's to say who you're really talking to and how you're being influenced?
Mm-hmm.
Think of upcoming elections in the U.S. Think of how polarized societies across the world are getting. That's a very very dangerous area. So
Yeah.
I think people are starting to use it for political campaigning, actually. But anything that where you apply it in social interaction, especially in like mental health coaching and so on,
Mm-hmm.
that I think is pretty much doomed to fail because uh, that's not what these tools can do. There's no
Mm-hmm.
intelligence there. There's no ghost in a machine
Yeah.
whatsoever. But if the moment people think there is, then problems arise because
Mm-hmm.
obviously you can tell that you shouldn't be putting glue on your pizza, but who's to tell that you shouldn't be confronting your wife about a certain habit she has?
Mm-hmm.
Like that sounds pretty okay, and it comes from this mental health tool. So maybe I should go and do it. Well, that way I think leads to divorce. So
Yeah.
um so those are areas where I would be wary, and I see a lot of startups happening there, but I think they're pretty much all doomed to fail.
Mm-hmm.
Um like an assistant to a psychologist, okay, that's one thing,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but a virtual psychologist, yeah, that's not going to work.
Yeah, that scares me a lot because you see stories coming up about how people are using ChatGPT to be their new therapist. And, they claim that, hey, my life has turned around, right? I could talk to my therapist. This is great. But more and more, you're seeing people look for actual coaching, advice, and diagnosis
Yeah.
with these different LLMs. And I agree about the likelihood of them failing. And my fear is what what side of the relationship is going to fail first, the AI or the person using it, right? At what point does the person take all of the suggestions as at face value and start executing on them, right? Maybe they're
Yeah.
doing cognitive behavior therapy on the wrong things, and now they're going to spiral even deeper. So, yeah, it's going to fail, but is it going to be the person or the product that fails
Yeah.
first? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
Weizenbaum actually had some research on that, and unfortunately there's indications that it might be the person first,
Mm-hmm.
because you're not engaging in like a 5-minute conversation, right? You're doing this over days and weeks, and
Mm-hmm.
you're actually, like, people have relationships to their cars, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't say, "Oh, this guy hit my car." It's like, "Hey, he hit me." So we anthropomorphize very quickly, um,
Yeah.
and that means it's like the movie Her. You built the relationship first. The AI tool doesn't care. It's like at some point it's going to probably detect, oh, this is a pattern that I shouldn't be reinforcing because I'm programmed to be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then at that point it's already too late.
Yeah. Yeah. This is. this is getting into the dark side, I think, of AI. I mean, social media is packed with AI and algorithms that are surfacing certain information to you already. So I would even venture to say that in some ways the AI is winning, right? Because it's
Yeah.
really hard to pull away from that to get out of the silo it's putting you into. And wow, I didn't expect the conversation to go deep into mental health, but yeah, it's scary for sure. So yeah, any closing thoughts? We have a couple minutes left. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to pop them in.
So if you, while we're waiting for questions, if you looked into LinkedIn and search for Bold Ninja, you'll see some experiments by Jesus Serrano, who's an acquaintance of mine. He works at Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically created an 80s side scroller uh, beat 'em up game from scratch with using ChatGPT and a couple of other
Mm-hmm.
AI tools. And 98% of the code is completely AI written. And it's almost a working game. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
incredible what they were able to achieve with it. And I had done some similar experiments with my kid about a year back. Um,
I think I
and
remember seeing you posted about that.
yeah, that was back with 3.5, so it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
quite as evolved yet. Now with 4.0, there's like you don't really need to know how to build software or how to build a game. It can lead you through it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's incredible to see um what they've made, and they're documenting the whole experiment on LinkedIn. So look for Bald Ninja, and you'll see some great examples, and hopefully
Okay,
play the
well,
game soon.
yeah, we'll have to post that in the comments so that we could see it. But this has been great. It's been awesome having you on this second live stream. I love it. I'm excited. I think that AI is going to take things in a lot of unique ways, but like you said, it's very easy to enter some danger zones, and we need to figure out how we're going to prepare for that. I don't know if we're even prepared for social media yet, and that's already been how many 20 plus years. So
Yeah.
we're going to have to figure out how to adapt faster. But
That's for sure. But that's part
yeah,
of the fun, working in tech, right?
absolutely.
All
All right. Well, have a
right.
great day. Hopefully it stops raining. And thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thanks, AJ. Thanks, everyone, for joining in. Have a great day. Bye.